Wyoming Territory. 1878, the sun was just starting to set behind the Bighorn Mountains when Archer Tate spotted the girl alone by the side of the trail. Her face streaked with dust and tears. Her small hands clenched at her skirt like she was trying to disappear into the dirt. He was riding back from delivering supplies to a ranch near Ten Sleep, his saddlebags nearly empty, his mind already drifting toward camp and coffee. But the sight of her stopped him cold. She stood near a withered cottonwood, beside a broken wagon wheel, like something left behind and forgotten. She could not have been more than 19. Archer swung down from his horse, boots crunching dry gravel. "Miss," he asked, not moving too close. "You hurt?" The girl flinched at his voice, but her eyes lifted, green and sharp despite the dust. "No. I am not hurt." "Where's your family?" She hesitated. Her lips trembled, but then she pressed them tight. "Gone." He looked around. No horses, no wagon. Just that splintered wheel, a few broken crates, a torn bundle of cloth. "Gone where?" The girl lowered her gaze. "Left me. Said I was too much trouble." Archer's jaw tensed. "Your kin did that." She nodded once, quick and stiff. He took a slow breath, trying to keep the heat out of his voice. "What's your name?" Nella Carver." He nodded. "I'm Archer Tate." She did not offer anything else, just stood there like she expected him to leave her too. He rubbed his jaw. "You got anywhere to go, Nella?" She shook her head. He looked at her again, her dress torn at the hem, the hollows under her cheeks, the way she held herself like any sudden sound might send her running. Archer stepped back and gestured to his horse. "Come with me. I got a place not far from here." She blinked. "Why?" "Because you are not staying out here alone." He paused, then added quieter, "And I do not leave people behind." Nella glanced at the horse, then him. Her lips parted, but no words came. After a moment, she nodded. He helped her up gently, then climbed behind her, careful not to crowd. She sat stiff as a board at first, but she did not pull away. They rode in silence until the slope evened out and the trees opened into a clearing. Archer's cabin sat just ahead, simple and rough-hewn, with a small corral and a lean-to for firewood. Smoke still curled from the chimney. The place was quiet, the way he liked it. He swung down and reached up to help her. She took his hand, her fingers cold. When her boots touched the dirt, she swayed slightly. "You eaten today?" he asked. She shook her head. He led her inside. The cabin was one room, but clean. He lit the lamp and stirred the coals in the stove before adding more wood. As the fire caught, he pulled down a tin of beans and a wedge of bread, slicing it without a word. She sat at the small table, eyes taking in everything: the rifle above the door, the single bed against the far wall, the folded quilt on the rocker. He set the plate in front of her and poured water from the jug. "Not much, but it'll do." "Thank you," she whispered. As she ate, he watched her hands, how they trembled, how she kept her eyes low. She had been through something rough. He could see it in the way she flinched when the fire popped. Afterward, she stood awkwardly in the middle of the room. "I can sleep on the floor. You can take the bed," he said. "I will roll out near the fire. I do not want to cause trouble. You are not." She looked at him then, really looked, and something in her face softened. "You do not even know me," he nodded. "No, but I can tell you are decent and scared, and you need rest." She hesitated, then nodded once. "All right." That night, Archer lay on a blanket near the hearth, listening to the wind scrape against the shutters. He heard her shift once on the bed, then go still. He stared at the ceiling beams, thinking about the haunted look in her eyes. He had seen that same look in men who came back from war. He had never planned to take anyone in. Had always figured he would live quiet and die the same. But now there was a girl sleeping in his bed, too thin and too alone, and something about that made the silence feel different. When morning came, she was already up, folding the blanket at the foot of the bed. "You do not have to do chores," he said, stepping into his boots. I want to, she said. I do not want to just take. He looked at her, the way she stood straighter now, her hair brushed back, the faint pink in her cheeks. All right, we will start with the goats. You ever milked one before? She smiled, small but real. No, but I can learn. They fell into a rhythm. She helped with the animals, swept the floor, chopped vegetables for stew. She did not talk much, but she listened. And every so often she would laugh, soft and surprised, like she had forgotten she still could. One afternoon she stood out by the fence, watching the sky. He walked up beside her, arms folded. You miss them? He asked. She looked at him. No, she said, voice steady. They never really wanted me. I always knew it. He felt something twist in his chest. Then they are fools. She looked away, but not before he saw her eyes shine. That night as she washed dishes, he said, You don't have to stay forever, but you can, as long as you want. She paused, plate in hand. Do you want me to stay? He met her gaze. Yes, I do, she swallowed. Then I will. The days passed. The snow melted. Spring came. She started to hum while she worked. He caught himself watching the curve of her cheek, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. And she watched him too. When he came in from chopping wood, her eyes always found him first. One evening he brushed a strand of hair from her brow, and she leaned into his touch like she had been waiting for it. I never thought I would feel safe again, she whispered. You are safe now, he said. With me. She looked up at him. And you? Do you want more than just being safe? He stepped closer. I want you, her breath caught. I want you too. Then she kissed him, gentle and sure, and the world outside the cabin went quiet. Neither of them had planned for this. But it was real. It was theirs, and they were not alone anymore. The first real rain came in late April, quiet and steady, soaking the earth in a way that made everything smell new. Nella stood under the eaves, arms folded, watching the drops slide off the edge of the roof like silver threads. Archer came up beside her, wiping his hands on a rag after setting aside a broken harness. Soaks straight through the bones, this kind of rain, he said. She didn't look away from the trees. It's the kind I used to wish for. He glanced at her profile. Why? When I was small, I thought if it rained hard enough, it might wash everything clean. Like maybe it'd take away the bad things if I just stood in it long enough. He didn't answer right away. Then, you want to try? She turned to him, brow lifted. He stepped out into the downpour, hat in hand, letting the rain run down his face and neck. Come on, he said, looking back at her. For a moment she just stared. Then she stepped out barefoot, lifting her skirts above her ankles. The mud squelched between her toes and she laughed, light and startled, like she hadn't expected it to come out that way. They walked the edge of the clearing, water running down their sleeves, thunder muttering far off in the hills. She tilted her face to the sky, eyes closed. I used to pretend I was someone else when it rained, she said. That I was born somewhere different, to people who didn't make me feel like a burden just for breathing. Archer kept pace beside her, boots sinking in the soft earth. You don't have to pretend anymore. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Don't I? He stopped. You are not a burden, you never were. She stood still, rain dripping from her lashes. You don't have to keep saying kind things just to make me feel better. I don't say anything I don't mean. Her gaze held his. Then she reached out and touched his hand, fingers curling gently around his. His skin was cold from the rain, but her grip was firm. When the rain let up, they went inside, dripping and breathless. She toweled her hair in front of the stove while he changed shirts behind the door curtain. When he stepped back out, she was folding his wet one and setting it near the fire to dry. You didn't have to do that, he said. She brushed her damp hair behind her ears. I wanted to. He watched her a moment. You always do things quiet, like you're trying not to take up too much space. She looked down. Old habits. You don't have to keep him here. Later that week, Archer saddled his mare and tied a pack to the back, glancing toward the cabin as Nella stepped out holding a small tin box. "What's that?" he asked. "You're stitching needles," she said. "You left them with the kitchen things." He took the box from her and set it in the saddlebag. "You sure you want to come?" She nodded. "I've never been to town as someone who belonged anywhere." They rode side by side down the long slope toward Buffalo, the wind carrying the scent of pine and wet clay. Nella's eyes moved over the hills like she was memorizing every line. In town, Archer kept close by her side. She noticed a woman across the street glance at them and whisper something to a man with a tin badge. The sheriff, maybe. Nella's hand twitched near her waist, but Archer's voice steadied her. "You want to walk through the mercantile first or save it for last?" "First," she said. "Before I lose my nerve." Inside, she ran her fingers over bolts of cloth and rows of buttons, pausing at a shelf of hair ribbons. Archer leaned near. "Pick one." "I don't need it." "That don't matter." She chose a deep blue one and didn't say anything when he paid for it. Back outside, he handed her the parcel. "Blue suits you." She blinked once, then held the ribbon up against her wrist. "It's pretty." He didn't say it matched her eyes. He figured she knew. They rode back in the quiet hour before dusk, the sky streaked orange and the hills casting long shadows. She rode lighter in the saddle, like something inside her had eased. That night, as they sat by the fire, she unrolled a bit of muslin and began sewing a patch on one of his shirts, her stitches even and small. He watched her work. "Where'd you learn that, Mrs. Fields?" "She took me in for a while when I was 12. Her hands shook too much to hold a needle." "She sounds good." "She was. Died before winter." He nodded, letting the weight of that settle. She tied off the last stitch and set the shirt aside. "Archer?" "Yeah. Do you ever think about what it would have been like if everything had gone different?" He looked at her. "Sometimes, but not lately." Her eyes met his. "No," he shook his head. "Since you came, I've been thinking more about what comes next." She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she reached for his hand, their fingers lacing together slow and sure. "I like the sound of that," she whispered. He held her gaze. "So do I." By June, the hills had turned soft green and the creek behind the cabin ran clear and fast. Nella had taken to walking there in the mornings, bare feet in the grass, skirts lifted above the dew. Archer watched her from the porch sometimes, coffee cooling in his hand, the quiet between them no longer heavy but full. One such morning she returned with her apron damp and a thin bundle of wild mint tucked beneath her arm. "I thought maybe we could dry it," she said, brushing past him into the cabin. "Hang it near the stove." He set his cup down. "You thinking of making tea or keeping the flies out?" "A bit of both." She tied the mint with twine and hung it from a nail, her fingers sure now, movements practiced. Her presence in the cabin had settled into the bones of the place, her stitching on the chair cushion, her handwriting on the scrap of paper tacked by the door with a list of what they'd need for winter. It no longer felt like she was visiting a life that wasn't hers. After breakfast, Archer hitched the wagon. He nodded toward the barn. "You want to come with me to the Miller place?" She wiped her hands on her apron. "I reckon I do." They rode in the open wagon, the sun warm on their shoulders. The Millers lived a few miles east, where the land flattened out and the wind came through steady. Archer hadn't been by since helping build the new corral last fall. As they pulled up, a boy of about 11 darted from the barn, waving. "Mr. Tate." "You come to see the new colt?" Archer climbed down, offering a hand to Nella. "Didn't know there was one." Mrs. Miller came out onto the porch, wiping her arms with her apron. "He was born just after sunup. Gangly thing, but strong." Nella lingered by the fence while Archer walked with them to the barn. She watched the boy climb up on the lower rail and point eagerly toward the colt. When he caught her looking, he grinned and waved her over. "You want to see? He's real tall for a baby." She stepped forward slowly. The barn smelled of hay and warm hide. Inside, the mare stood protectively near her foal, whose legs seemed too long for his body. "Careful not to spook her," Archer said, glancing over his shoulder. "She's still watchful." Nella stayed near the open door. "He's beautiful." The colt's coat was a pale gold with a white blaze across his nose. Mrs. Miller leaned against a post. "We'll likely sell him come next year once he's steady." "Where does a colt like that end up?" Nella asked. "Sometimes the cavalry buys him. Sometimes ranchers from down near Cheyenne. You never know." Nella looked at the animal like she was trying to picture him somewhere else. "Seems strange, being born here and not knowing where you'll end up." Mrs. Miller tilted her head. "That's true of most of us, I suppose." They stayed for supper: roast hen with turnips and a dense brown loaf sliced into thick slabs. Nella helped wash the dishes, sleeves rolled to her elbows, laughing softly with Mrs. Miller over the chipped basin. Archer sat on the porch with Mr. Miller, the two men smoking in companionable silence. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Miller laid a hand on Nella's arm. "You look well, dear. Settled?" Nella glanced toward Archer, who was adjusting the harness. "I am." On the ride back, the air turned cooler, the sky feathered with long, pink clouds. Nella rested her hand on the rough wood of the wagon seat. "I liked her," she said. "Mrs. Miller. She carries herself like she's built something that can't be taken away." Archer nodded. "She has." Nella was quiet a moment, then turned toward him. "Do you think people like us get to have that? Something that lasts?" He looked at her, the way the wind lifted her hair, the crease between her brows. "We already do. We just have to keep tending to it." She reached for his hand, palm warm against his. "I want to." Evening settled around them as they rolled on, wheels creaking steady beneath them. The land stretched wide and open, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was passing through someone else's life. She was building her own, one day at a time, beside a man who saw her not as trouble or burden, but as part of the shape his future took. That night, after the fire had burned down low, she turned to him in the dark. "I want to stay," she whispered. "Not just now. For good." Archer reached for her, his voice steady in the hush. "You already have." By early July, the land had hardened under the weight of sun and wind. The breeze that swept through the valley was dry and restless, shaking loose petals from the wild roses that clung stubbornly to the edges of the trail. Nella sat by the open window, mending a torn feed sack with quiet precision, her foot braced against the leg of the table to steady the cloth. Archer stepped in from the yard, brushing dust from his shirt sleeve. "Mail wagon came through," he said, holding up a small envelope. "Stopped down by the forks. Miller boy passed this along." Nella set her needle aside. "For me," he offered it without a word. The writing on the front was small and uneven, like the hand that wrote it didn't take to letters easily. She opened it carefully, sliding her thumb beneath the flap. Her eyes moved over the page once, then again, slower. When she looked up, her face was unreadable. "It's from my brother," she said at last. Archer pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Didn't know you had one still living." "I hadn't heard from him in almost 3 years. Name's Illy. He stayed on with my uncle's freight team when I was sent off." "Is he asking something of you?" She shook her head. "Just said he heard what happened, wants to know if I'm safe." Archer leaned back, folding his arms. "Do you want to answer?" "I don't know yet." He didn't press. She folded the letter and tucked it into the worn book she kept on the shelf. Between 2 pages she hadn't turned in weeks. That night, as they shelled beans on the porch, the air thick with the scent of sagebrush and dust, Nella spoke without looking up. "He was the only one who ever stood up for me. When my stepfather got rough, Illy would take the blame. He left when he was 16, said he'd earn enough to send for me, but he never did. Archer let the silence stretch until she was ready to fill it. I think he meant to, she said. I think life just got in the way. He tossed a stem into the bucket. Some folks let time pass until they stop knowing how to come back. Doesn't mean they didn't care. She looked over at him. Is that how you feel about anyone? He hesitated. There's a girl buried up near the ridge. My younger sister. Fever took her when I was 19. I was the one who was supposed to keep her safe. Nella's eyes didn't leave his face. You were just a boy. Still. It changed the way I carried things after. They didn't speak for a while, the rhythm of their hands working through the beans, the sun sliding low behind the hills. Later, as they lay in bed, the window opened to the sound of crickets. Nella turned toward him in the dark. Would you come with me if I went to see him? Archer's hand found hers. If that's what you want, I'll ride beside you. She nodded against his shoulder. It ain't forgiveness I'm looking for. Just I'd like to see his face once more, and know if he's still like I remember. They left 3 mornings later, with enough supplies for 5 days and a borrowed compass from Miller. The trail south took them through dry ridges and pale rock, the sun following them like a watchful eye. They camped in a dry arroyo the second night, where Archer built a fire low between 2 stones, and Nella cooked cornmeal cakes in a blackened skillet. She rolled her sleeves and leaned back against her saddle, chewing slowly. I don't know what I'll say if he asks why I never wrote. You don't owe anyone your pain, Archer said. She held his gaze across the fire. You say things straight. Don't know how to say them any other way. The next day brought them to a freight camp east of Powder River, where the wagons were lined in a wide circle, canvas flaps tied back to let the heat escape. A man with a weathered face and a limp pointed them toward a tent near the edge. Nella dismounted and walked the last few steps alone. Archer stayed beside the horses, watching her shoulders, the way they squared as she reached the opening. She didn't come out for a long time. When she did, she held her brother's hand. Illy was lean and tanned, with the same green eyes and a softness around the mouth that made him look younger than he was. He nodded toward Archer with cautious respect. Heard you took her in, he said. I'm glad for it. Archer tipped his hat. Nella looked between them. I told him I'm not coming back to the old life, that I've found something better. Archer took her hand, warm and sure in his. That you have. They stayed the night in a spare tent, and in the morning Illy walked them back to their horses. He hugged his sister tight, then stepped back, voice rough. You ever want to write, you've got a place to send it now, she nodded. Take care of yourself. On the trail home, Nella rode close beside Archer, the rhythm of the horses steady beneath them. I feel clearer, she said. Like something's done winding tight inside me. He reached over and brushed a curl from her cheek. You look it. As the cabin came into view near dusk the next day, she let out a slow breath. This is home, she said. It always was, Archer answered. The summer heat deepened as August settled its weight across the valley. The soil cracked where it had once held spring's softness, and the days stretched long and quiet. Archer rose early to tend to the fence line, which the wind had worked loose in the northern pasture, while Nella moved through the cabin with a steady hand, her motions shaped by rhythm rather than rush. One morning, she found a faded scrap of muslin tucked between the folds of an old grain sack in the barn loft. It had been used once as lining, perhaps years ago, and when she brushed the dust away, she saw the faint outline of a hand-stitched rose, the thread sun-bleached nearly white. She brought it down, spread it flat on the table, and studied it for a long time before speaking. Did you do this? She asked as Archer stepped in, boots marked with dry earth. He leaned over her shoulder. My mother did. When I was small, She never made much, but she liked to leave her mark on things. Nella traced the edge of the rose with her thumb. She was gentle, he nodded, quiet, kind, saying while she worked. My father didn't always deserve her. Nella folded the scrap carefully and placed it in the bottom drawer with her sewing things. I'd like to leave something behind like that. You will, he said. You already are. By late August, a letter came addressed to Archer, bearing the postmark of a mining town in the Wind River Range. He opened it without ceremony and read it twice before setting it on the table. Old friend of mine, he said. Silas Rhodes. Says he's heading through this way come September. Looking to sell his team and settle south, maybe near Rawlins. Nella looked up from where she was chopping onions. Will he stay the night? Likely. I haven't seen him in a long while. We rode together when I was still drifting, before I came to this land. She wiped her hands. If he's important to you, he's welcome. Silas arrived on a dry morning, his beard longer than Archer remembered and his horse walking with a limp. They embraced without words. Nella brought out water in a basin, and Silas bent to rinse his hands, grinning up at her through the dust. So this is the woman who got Archer to stop wandering. Nella offered a nod, neither shy nor forward. He wandered straight into something worth keeping. That night, they sat by the fire with a pot of stew between them. Silas told stories of the old trails, of snowstorms in the Tetons, and a night spent up a tree to avoid a bear. Nella listened with quiet amusement, occasionally glancing at Archer, who leaned back with a familiar ease she hadn't seen before. When Silas finally turned serious, his gaze settled on Archer. You were always looking for something you didn't have a name for. Looks like you found it. Archer looked across the fire at Nella. I did. Silas left the next morning, one of Archer's horses hitched to his wagon. As he disappeared down the slope, Nella stood beside Archer in the yard. You miss that life? She asked. No, he said. It never gave me what this has. In early September, with the heat easing and the mornings crisp again, Nella took to gathering fallen apples from the tree behind the barn. They were small and tart, but she baked them into a pie that made Archer's eyes go wide with the first bite. I reckon I could eat 10 of these, he said, mouth full. You'll get one, she replied, if you chop the rest of that wood before sundown. He stood and kissed her cheek. That a promise? She didn't answer, but the smile in her eyes was enough. That evening, as the sun dropped low and the yard filled with the scent of split cedar, Archer came inside to find her at the table, spreading a piece of rough linen across the wood. What's this? He asked, wiping his hands. She looked up. I want to make something, for you. Something that'll last. He sat across from her. I don't need anything. I know, that's why it matters. She spent the next week working in the afternoons, the needle moving in and out of the fabric like a heartbeat. She didn't show him until it was done. It was a shirt, plain at first glance, but the cuffs bore a small design, 2 crossed branches stitched in dark green, a single rosebud where they met. He touched the thread with reverence. Is that the mark you wanted to leave? No, she said. That's the one I want you to carry. He wore it the next Sunday when they rode together to the Miller homestead for supper. Mrs. Miller raised her brows at the sight. That's a fine stitch, she said. You've made a home, haven't you? I have, Nella answered, her voice steady. And I intend to keep it. That winter, they built a second shed, laid in extra flour and dried beans, and spent long evenings by the fire, reading from the worn book she kept, the pages soft from use. When the snow came, they walked hand in hand through the drifts, their footprints side by side. Come spring, the land began to green again. The goats birthed twins, and the hens laid more than they could eat. Nella planted a row of herbs along the south wall, and Archer repaired the porch rail where the wind had worn it smooth. One afternoon, as she hung laundry in the breeze, he came up behind her and slipped his arms around her waist. "You ever think about adding another voice to this place?" he asked. She turned in his arms. "You mean a child?" he nodded, his forehead resting against hers. "I do," she whispered. "I think about it often." They didn't speak of it again that day, but they didn't need to. The seasons turned. Life didn't grow easier, but it grew fuller. The land gave back what they tended to, and the cabin remained warm, not because of the stove, but because of what they built between its walls. Years passed gently. The apple tree grew gnarled, and the wind carried new stories across the hills. But through it all, Archer and Nella remained two people who had once been left behind, now choosing every day to walk forward together. And in the quiet hours when the fire burned low and the world outside turned dark and wide, they held hands beneath the quilt she'd sewn, content in the shape of the life they had made. They were not alone. They never would be again.